All right, it's now time to toss over to Flo Twaba. Flo Twaba, tell us what's going on.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up Youth Month. We're still in Youth Month. And while we do that, this morning we've invited the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Mr. Buti Manamela, to discuss the challenges. And I think when there's challenges, there are also opportunities that are facing institutions of higher education. Deputy Minister, thank you so very much for joining us here on Afro Breakfast on Afro Worldview. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, just, as a start, the country, I think, has made some great strides in making tertiary education accessible to the poor, which also came at, it was a process. I mean, we had the Fees Must Fall protests and all that came then. It seems that you heard the young students. But even though there are challenges, what is your take on the strides that the government has made in terms of addressing some of the challenges that the learners had been talking about?
Yeah. Look, I think firstly, we... it was inevitable that South Africa has to go this route because of the urgent need for us to invest into our skills development and human resource development needs. And I think that, but also the pressure that has been building up for over the years. I think a lot of us only appreciated the role played by the Fees Must Fall, but a whole range of generations of students, workers, and communities have been calling for free education. And I think it was about what priorities are there at the time and all of that. But I think what is important now, is that a whole number of students who ordinarily would not have had access to education are now going into universities, into TVET colleges. We're putting in more money into what is referred to as ABET centers, but which we call continuing education and training institutions or community colleges. We're putting more money into skills development. And we think that through that investment, the almost accepted notion of skills shortage in South Africa will become a thing of the past. And what our focus now, given that we're opening the doors of learning, our focus now is on what kind of skills young people should be learning. Yes, it's one thing to say we're going to give you a bursary, but if you're going to get that bursary and then you have hundreds of thousands of students going to study theology, without diversifying in terms of what our skills needs are, then that doesn't take our country where it should be going. So it will have to be around, priority skills, and so forth and so forth. But also to make our universities and our TVET colleges work. So there's a lot of money that's going into the infrastructure development. There's a lot of money that's going to be going into lecturer development as it relates to TVES. There's also a lot of money that's going to go into, the work to, school to work training programs, because part of the bigger criticism, especially as it relates to our TVET colleges, is that we take students into theory, into a classroom, and when they get into the world of work, they have absolutely no experience. So it's a combination of interventions. So it's not only about student fees that government has now, funded. Yes, the NSFAS, allocation has now moved from about, 9 billion rands to more than 20 billion. But there's a whole range of other interventions that we are making to ensure that the system delivers on the needs of our country.
Deputy Minister, it's all good and well to address the issue of fees and to make, tertiary education accessible to all South Africans. But there is one, and I suppose the looming crisis, if one can call it that, which you've not actually touched on, interestingly enough, and that's the issue of accommodation. And you might have seen, some of the you've seen like documentaries, visuals, all of that, of students perhaps even sleeping on the floors of libraries, on bathroom floors, showering, at the facilities, at the universities that are meant for, sports facilities, things like that. It's an unattainable situation, Minister. And how is this particular situation being addressed? Are you talking about it? Are you are you developing strategies to deal with this? I think it is actually a crisis. And just to back that up as well, the issue of hunger. Students are complaining about not even having food as they are at these tertiary institutions. So we can address the fact that, yes, you can sit in a lecture and listen to a lecturer talking and have your notes and study and all of that, but there are other issues that are linked to that too.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, once you address certain challenges, they either create or compound, certain challenges. And I don't think that, we need to throw our hands in the air and say, look, we're not going to create more access just because there's no accommodation, or, if we provide free education, we may fail and all of that. And I think, government took a much bigger risk in implementing the fee-free higher education at the time it did, and with the resources it had, and with the compromises it had to make, knowing fully well that we'll not be able to achieve all the things at the same time. But, we're cognizant of all of those challenges. Firstly, and which is what I think is important, is that over the medium-term expenditure, we're putting in more than 4 billion rands that's going to go into infrastructure development for TVET colleges, which includes improving, the accommodation infrastructure that's there. We're encouraging, the private sector to invest into, the accommodation need of some of the TVET colleges. We are, also helping through our infrastructure section in the department, both universities and TVET sections to expand, based on their accommodation need. The reality is that we are in short of, close to 100,000 beds in universities. And our view is that if we go on in this way, the situation will become untenable. And that's why part of the things that we're looking at both with the minister is the possibility of expanding our open learning system, wherein students will have to study virtually, so they don't have to go into the actual university, but study from home, improve the UNISA system, for instance, and all of that. And I think those are some of the interventions that we're looking at to, take advantage of technology. So, students doesn't have to be frustrated with the fact that if they go to VERS, they'll end up not having accommodation or food or anything. And that will drastically and significantly also reduce the cost of education. So those are some of the measures that we're looking at. But in the meantime, the main intervention is to make sure that the NSFAS work. They allocate allowances to students. I've been going around, the country together with the NSFAS to address individual problems that students has. And we're going to continue to do that. Until we ensure that the NSFAS system is perfected. Remember that the NSFAS was responsible for, for as many as, not for as many as, but for as much as 9 billion rands. And now you've said to them, stop the loan system. You're going to be administering a bursary system. We're giving you close to, more than 20 billion rands. We are, of course, hopefully with the final report, the number will be much more bigger. But we're talking, close to 70% of the entire university and TVET college student population that the NSFAS is now going to be responsible. There were bound to be those challenges. But we think that with the department working together with the NSFAS, we will be able to resolve some of those challenges.
One of the things that you spoke about, and I'm just taking a step back here, you said that you wanted students that are in tertiary institutions to be ready for, the work environment or whatever, if they choose to go into business, but that readiness of the students as they leave tertiary institutions. This affects you, but it might not necessarily be under your own portfolio. The other issue is before that. Now, students who are coming out of high schools are said to not be adequately prepared for tertiary institutions. Now, this is, of course, the the issue of the basic education department. Are you working in sync with basic education to address that? Because that is also a huge problem where we see students, you know, sort of failing out of varsity in the first year, the second year dropping out, or, you know, F7s as we used to call them. Are you addressing that with the basic education department, and how closely linked are the two departments, because it does affect the
most definitely. Look, I mean, we're working together with the Deputy Minister of Basic Education to look at you know, the improvement, and generally government is concerned with improving the quality of basic education, the output, and all of that. But the student dropout and the pass rate at universities and TVET colleges is as a result of you know, a whole range of factors. Yes, the key thing is, what do we get as higher education? But the second thing is, do students choose the careers that you know, they are comfortable with? A student leaves, I mean, with straight A's, leaves high school, and then they go to TEFLOP, and then they say they want to be a lawyer. Then they find out that that's not what they're actually cut out for. The third factor, you know, is a I mean, the psychological factors of being in a different environment. Someone has been staying at home for 12 years of their schooling, and then they're put in a completely different environment. They've got to cope with that. They don't have the support that they've had at home. There's a whole range of other things, peer pressure and all of that, but also learning in a different environment. You know, and finally, some basic skills, which we think you know, students should be coming up with from basic education into universities. I mean, we've had a lot of reports around, and of course we appreciate the fact that there's an improvement, but issues around numeracy and language skills, you know, those are big factors, actually. You go to techies, you know, where students are expected to study a whole course of whatever in Afrikaans, for instance. Those are some of the factors which we, you know, want to work around them and ensure that, you know, they improve. Part of the discussions that has been happening in the past is whether do we not need an extra year, you know, at a tertiary level, or even at a basic education level, which will become that bridge
the gap
between
you know,
the
I'm
two
being told to wrap up, but I
systems.
can't do that without raising this, because this is particularly important to me when it comes to you know, some of the challenges that are there at tertiary institutions. There is an increase in gender-based violence, and quite frankly, I can't not say this. I find it ironic that your predecessor is someone who's actually even accused of it. How is government going to address the issue of gender-based violence whilst we have, well, he's now an MP still, while we have officials in government themselves who are sort of been seen as people who are guilty of gender-based violence themselves?
I want to address this in two factors. Firstly, that the government has to be seen to be acting on anybody who is in government, who is accused of or who's found guilty of gender-based violence in whatever form. And I think that that's important. And I hope that, you know, the political parties and structures, which has, you know, those people within them will address the issue. I think that's one. But the second thing is that, you know, addressing the issue of gender-based violence is not only about addressing the question of perpetrators. And that's why, you know, part of what the department and the ministry has been working on over the last 2 years, and which we hopefully will be launching in August, is a policy that deals with gender-based violence in institutions of learning. That policy says, one, we need to support the victims. Two, we need to create structures in universities and TVET colleges that, you know, addresses these challenges. You know, so someone must not find themselves in limbo if they are raped, if they are threatened, if they're intimidated, if a lecturer says, give me sex, I'll give you marks, and all of that. And then, you know, four is supporting organizations on our campuses that deals with gender-based violence. And I think finally, and which is, I think more importantly, is ensuring that the perpetrators of gender-based violence are dealt with.
Yeah.
Sometimes all these things are wrapped, under the carpet and all of that, and we really have to, deal with that. And I hope that, through this policy, we will be able to make an impact and reduce the violence on our campuses. But also what I want to underscore is that what happens in our campuses is a reflection of what happens in society in general. And we hope that students will become advocates in communities where they come from in dealing with gender-based violence, gender stereotypes, gender roling, and all of that.
Buti Manamela, Deputy Minister, thank you so very much for giving us your time. To viewers, thank you very much for tuning in to Afro Breakfast. My apologies to Abigail Fasaki. I've stepped into her show. Do have yourself a lovely weekend. Myself and Richard will be back with you bright and early on Monday morning. Take care. Cheers.